Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger from the Schiller Institute, and I'd like to welcome you to this week's webcast featuring our president and founder, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. The big news this week is coming from Africa, where there's a very extraordinary summit underway, the BRICS conference, the BRICS Plus, you might say. Xi Jinping has done a tour of several African countries. There are a number of meetings underway. And now, yesterday, the BRICS summit opened with a very strong and important speech by President Xi Jinping of China. And it doesn't seem as though much of the leadership in the Western world is paying much attention to this at all. So, Helga, why don't we start there? What's the global significance of this BRICS conference?
Well, I think it is the building of a new world economic order, and the Chinese-African relations is of the highest strategic importance. I know that many people tend to dismiss Africa, especially in the United States, but what is happening is very extraordinary because Xi Jinping made a tour from the Emirates to Senegal, Rwanda, South Africa, where he met with the heads of state. And in each case, they emphasized the extreme importance and friendship between the respective countries and Africa as a whole. So there were many articles in the context of this trip and also the BRICS summit saying what is happening is the new alliance of the BRICS Plus, that there are many developing countries from the whole world who are scheduled to become members or associates to the BRICS. And that is why it's called BRICS Plus. So there are many guests, leaders of states invited to the BRICS summit who participate. And I would really suggest to all of our viewers, our audience, that is you, to actually take the time and read the entire speech of President Xi Jinping, which he gave at the opening of the BRICS conference, because this is a spirit, which is directly the new Silk Road spirit. And it shows a kind of thinking which is completely unheard of by any Western leaders, at least, concerning European leaders, I can say that for sure. So what Xi Jinping emphasized is the special role of science, which is, he called, an inexhaustible power for development and the improving of the lives of people. He also emphasized that Africa is that region of the world which has by far the largest development potential, which is obviously also not the view most Western countries have about Africa. And he evoked the spirit of Nelson Mandela, whose 100th birthday has just passed. And he also emphasized that the international community is at a new crossroad of building a completely new set of international relations. And, if you look at the increase of trade between China and Africa, and also the increase of direct investment, it is quite amazing. In 1978, Chinese trade with the entire African continent was 765 million. And last year, it already was 170 billion, and it soon will reach 400 billion per year. So as you can see, these are trade volumes which are quite significant. And I think what is really happening is that China has recognized that Africa has the potential to become the new China with African characteristics. And many African leaders are extremely happy to be inspired by the support China is giving. And it is quite interesting that there is also a broad discussion in the media in Africa and elsewhere that the difference is the West would only invest in African nations if they had resources and they could get, a big profit out of it. While China is clearly having such relations with countries who have almost no resources, but nevertheless, China is investing in infrastructure and building up industrial parks, hydropower, other kind of infrastructure. So this is really a big change. And then if you take in addition the fact that there is big interest, for example, on the side of India to have joint ventures with China in Africa, Japan, who wants to have joint investment with the Belt and Road Initiative in China, with China in Africa. So you can actually see that there is a complete potential for a complete new alignment. So this is the new paradigm coming into being. And you can really see that the world is changing in that sense to a much better place than people have any inkling of. And you can actually divide the world between those people who recognize that a new strategic model is being developed and very quickly joined by many countries in the world. People who know that, and those who absolutely are indifferent or ignorant or just don't get it, that the old paradigm does not function anymore, and that most of the countries of the world, the developing countries together with China and India, they represent 80% of the world population, and they represent also an increasing part of the world economy. The BRICS for the first time have bypassed the G7 in terms of GDP. And what we are trying to do, the Schiller Institute, is get the nations of the West to understand and recognize the incredible potential which lies in this new formation and not oppose it. So I think this is a very exciting development, and I can only encourage people to get on board and be part of it.
And one of the ways people can do that is to get the newly released copy, the second edition of the Silk Road Becomes the World Land Bridge, which is now available through the Schiller Institute. Now, Helga, you mentioned something about the contrast between the new paradigm and the old paradigm. I think that's no better illustrated than comparing what Xi Jinping said with the visit of the disgraced former president of the United States, Barack Obama. President Xi said every country has an equal right to development in his speech. Obama continues to say that Africa has to stick to a model of sustainable development. A couple of years ago, as president, he went to Africa and he said that if every African had an American-style standard of living, the planet would boil over. It appears as though most of the African governments are quickly siding with the Chinese on this and seeing this as an opportunity, aren't they?
Oh, yes. I think that is very clear, because all the speeches by the African leaders, they emphasize the friendship. It's not just interest. It's a real friendship, which some people like Churchill claimed does not exist among people. But I think this is absolutely foolish and wrong. You can start a friendship with the culture of another country, and that is exactly what we see right now.
Now, the idea of a BRICS plus, I know Indonesia, Turkey, several other countries were there. You mentioned Libya in our discussion before. What does it look like? Are they really going to be recruiting, also Argentina, are they going to bring new countries in to be a part of the BRICS and join in this process?
Yeah, there are several countries which are already candidates, like Egypt and others. And, the new Silk Road spirit is really changing the world. I mean, you talked about North Korea, the Singapore summit. Now Libya officially joined the Belt and Road Initiative. And obviously, this is in the context of the Italian government having revived the cooperation agreement between Italy and Libya, which existed during the Gaddafi government. And that is basically in order to compensate for the Italian colonial past with Libya. So Italy is engaging in the reconstruction of Libya, and there are demands that Libya should have a national army. which means the basically disarming of the militias, which is a precondition for this country to become stable. And obviously, this is a very important part, of dealing with the whole African situation, because Libya in the old fashion was a transport place for many of the human traffickers who would exploit the plight of the refugees from Africa. And obviously, there is an interest by the Italian government working with China on many projects now, also in Italy, in Libya, but before the Transaqua project. So, there is actually the concrete perspective of transforming the whole world through economic cooperation on the basis of win-win, working together in the mutual benefit of each. And I think that this is really what Xi Jinping also emphasized in the speech in Johannesburg, that, that down in the world, there is the choice between confrontation, which means lose-lose, which means, nobody is the winner, including of trade war, and the opposite choice of win-win. And, you just make the cake larger, and then everybody can have a larger piece of the cake. So I think that this is really the crucial issue. I mean, I said at the beginning of the year that this year must be the year to overcome geopolitics. And while it is not gone, and there are many people who just met in the Aspen Institute, for example, who are completely determined to maintain geopolitical confrontation. But I think that the majority of the world is clearly moving in a new era of civilization, of cooperation in the spirit of peace and development. I think people, should just really think through, that we are in one of these, and Xi Jinping also used the word that mankind has reached a new crossroad. And while the dangers are still there, the potentials are enormous.
You pointed to the Singapore model several weeks ago as an example of what happens when you have that kind of cooperation, where President Trump was working with the Japanese, the South Koreans, the Chinese, the Russians, to get the breakthrough that led to Singapore. We saw something similar with the Helsinki summit between Presidents Trump and Putin, but there's been an incredible blowback from the anti-Russian crowd, the neoconservatives, the geopoliticians in the United States. And it was announced just 2 days ago, or yesterday rather, that President Trump said the meeting with Putin will be postponed. He had invited Putin to come to the United States this fall, and now it's going to be postponed until as Trump said, the end of the witch hunt. What do you make of this? I mean, this is an incredible battle, and you see the effects of the Wall Street, the City of London, the whole Russiagate coming down as hard as they can on Trump. Where do you think this battle stands right now?
Well, I think that, it is very clear that Trump has an enormous battle at his hand. And the fact that he first invited Putin in the White House for this fall, and then feels that the pressure is too big. I think that reflects, the kind of really existential battle in the United States. But, the Congress is behaving absolutely disgusting. There are new motions to increase the sanctions against Russia once again, in a clear repeat of what happened already last summer when the Congress voted, I think, 98-2, basically to rein in Trump. But Trump outflanked that by having the Helsinki summit with Putin. And I think, this is not what the American population thinks. There was a new poll by The Hill, which says that 51% of all Americans are in favor of a second summit, and 67% of the people asked think that to have better relations with Russia is in the very fundamental interest of the United States. Now, if the people of the United States think that way, hopefully this will reflect itself in the November election, and all the people who are pushing this confrontation against Trump, against Russia, they should lose their seats. I think that would be a very good lesson to teach them.
Well, there's another poll, I think we mentioned it last week, which shows that of the concerns, the most serious concerns for Americans, less than 1% identified Russian so-called meddling in the election as something that concerns them. Now, obviously, the Congress is missing the point of what's come out on Russiagate, including some of the congressmen who are doing a very good job exposing it. This week, one of the things that came up is President Trump talked about stripping the clearance of former officials, such as Brennan, Clapper, and others. And Clapper made a statement that that was fairly direct, that Obama initiated Russiagate. So this isn't going to stop, is it, Helga? I mean, the exposure is going to continue. We've played a leading role in initiating it, but it does so piece by piece. The evidence is getting out there that it was the British working with the Obama intelligence officials that created and are running Russiagate.
Yeah, there is the new initiative by two Republican congressmen. One is Jim Jordan, and the name of the other one I just forgot, who demand the impeachment of Rosenstein by basically saying for 9 months the Congress tried to get the Department of Justice to cooperate and turn over documents, and that Rosenstein has been stonewalling for the entire period, and that this is an absolutely unacceptable conduct, and therefore he should be impeached and a new person should be installed. Now, this is very good. There are also articles by some former intelligence officials, like a former CIA agent who knows Brennan very well, who worked under him, who makes the argument that all former officials should be stripped of their security clearance, especially those who go to the media to take some important post in the media, because this leads to unacceptable leaking of secret information which these people got because of their previous position, and that in many cases they make money out of it and fill their own pockets, and therefore they should lose their clearance. So I think this is very important. Also, Sarah Sanders confirmed that this is being considered, and I think this would be a very good thing.
On the impeachment bill against Rosenstein, it was Jordan, who is one of the people who filed it, announced today that he will run for the position being vacated by Paul Ryan as Speaker of the House. The other person is Mark Meadows from the Freedom Caucus, who initiated it. Now, I want to move to the economy, Helga, because on the one side, we see the tremendous potential in the Belt and Road Initiative. And you have some figures on the Chinese economy. There's an annual economic report came out. But there's also the continued lagging and problems with the banking system in the West, the more and more people coming out warning of a collapse. What do we know from the figures, this new economic report? How is it going with China and the Belt and Road?
Well, Li Keqiang just met with the State Council executive and presented the annual economic report. And they have actually announced a very robust stimulus package to basically focus on the real economy. They create tax exempts for investments in basic research and development. They spend another 200 billion on infrastructure. They advise the credit institutions to give credits, especially to small and micro firms, which is obviously part of the eradication of poverty. And then, they announced a firm commitment to wipe out any kind of speculation and close down zombie firms. So they have clearly an inkling. Li Keqiang argued that in face of international challenges, that this is absolutely necessary. So obviously China is preparing for the potential collapse of the Western financial system by outlawing any kind of involvement in speculation and focusing entirely on the real economy, which is exactly what the West should be doing. So I think this is very good. And, I think it's also very interesting that the Russian-Chinese cooperation is definitely increasing. There was an important meeting in the Pyongyang Financial Institute, which was also participating was Sergei Glaziev as an economic advisor of President Putin, who also, emphasized the absolute increase of relationship between Russia and China. And he basically made a very important argument. He said, if the confrontation against Russia, new sanctions, and obviously the trade measures against China, if that continues, the only consequence will be that China, Russia, and other countries will move out of the dollar entirely, and that will then basically diminish the influence of the United States over the rest of the world. So I think, it is what Xi Jinping said. It's either cooperation or confrontation. And I think the road to overcome the problems would be to cooperate and not to go for a confrontation. And that includes the question of punitive tariffs. So, as I said, the cake must be made bigger, and then everybody wins. And that would be actually the way to go.
I think it's worth noting that punitive tariffs have the same effect as sanctions, that what they actually force is countries to creatively figure out how to do what they should do anyway, which is to develop, to invest in the real economy. And I think that's the point that's being made by the Chinese and Glaziev and others. Helga, we also have an update on developments with North Korea, continuing toward the solutions that were discussed in the Kim Jong-un meeting with President Trump. What can you tell us about that?
Well, as usual, the mainstream media tried to create the impression that nothing was working, that Kim Jong-un had just pulled Trump over the table, so to speak. Nothing like that is happening. Trump himself tweeted that he's absolutely satisfied with the speed with which the denuclearization moves ahead, and that he had a wonderful meeting with Putin, and that was a good thing. So the Russian ambassador to North Korea also made an important interview in which he stressed that Kim Jong-un is a very earnest and serious leader who absolutely has made a firm commitment to go ahead with denuclearization, and that basically everything is on a very good course. So I think this is very important because, there are people who would rather see World War III than to have these kinds of initiatives like Trump, Kim Jong-un, Trump, Putin succeed. But, I think so far the opposite is taking place. And this is also being confirmed by some of our friends in South Korea, who are absolutely hopeful that this process can be, furthered in the near future to a very good end.
And also, it appears as though the discussion process in Europe is opening up a little bit. I think Lavrov and General Gerasimov of the Russian Defense Ministry had meetings both in Berlin and also Paris with Macron. What's your take on what's happening in Europe? I mean, there seems to be a rudderless, chaotic situation. There doesn't seem to be any firm resolve to do much of anything, but I think the discussion is beginning to loosen up a little bit. What do you think?
Well, I think there are some interesting developments in Italy. The Prime Minister Conte will go and see Trump in 3 days. So this is obviously very important because Conte and Trump were the two leaders who demanded that Russia should join the G8, which Russia may not even want to do at this point. But, I think there is a very good accord between Conte and Trump and Conte and also Putin, because Italy is in favor of lifting the sanctions against Russia. So this is an interesting dynamic, and I already mentioned the Italian-Chinese cooperation in respect to Africa. So this is one dynamic. Then you have the situation in France, which is quite chaotic. it almost seems that somebody really wants to get rid of Macron because this scandal around his bodyguard beating people lying already on the floor is really exploding. The situation in Germany is terrible. I think that this present German government just doesn't have any idea what's going on. I mean, I can say the good thing is that Merkel supported the Helsinki summit between Putin and Trump, which is one time she says something decent, so I should praise her for that, which is not happening too often. Interesting is also the situation in Great Britain, where Corbyn just delivered a major speech to industrialists, where he demanded the reindustrialization of Great Britain. He said that the city of London totally focusing only on the so-called financial industry, which has very little or nothing to do with industry, was clearly a mistake, which was shown in the crisis of 2008. And therefore, he demands major industry to be opened up again in Great Britain, to use more national talents to build the things which have been outsourced again in Great Britain. And he said, no, nobody has accused him so far of having similarities to Trump, but he also focuses on the building up of the national economy in Great Britain. So I think that there are interesting developments. As you say, it's chaotic. You have the Austrian chancellor who will have an Africa-EU summit until the end of this year, where he is the president of the EU for this period. So I think, given the fact that the major next event will be the China-African Union event in Beijing in September, which obviously will be a continuation of the Xi Jinping trip to Africa, of the BRICS summit in South Africa. So I think at that major summit, there will be 52 heads of state, plus China, plus the African Union. So I already assume that will be a new degree of relationship between China and Africa. And that will have a major impact on this chaotic situation in Europe, given the fact that Chancellor Kurz from Austria plans to have this summit. So the Schiller Institute at our recent conference in Germany, we had a plan which I called the Singapore model, which is the idea that you can turn the worst kind of relationship into the opposite if you have the goodwill and a good plan, and that we should have a summit where the Europeans would work together with China in cooperation for the development of Africa in a crash program. So I think that this is the kind of setting, where major shifts will take place almost every day this year for sure. And I can only invite you, our viewers and our audience, to not sit on the fence in such an historic, incredible period, because if we get the United States and European nations to stop their geopolitical confrontation against Russia and China and look at the potentials of cooperating in the development of Latin America, of Africa, of the not so developed parts of Europe, and Asian countries, I mean, we can have a new paradigm of collaboration among the whole human species like it never existed before. And this is very clearly what China is actively building and putting together. So I think we have to put behind us the outdated warlike Cold War mentality, the idea that the world is always a zero-sum game where one is winning and the other one is losing, and that we can move to a new era of civilization, of a win-win cooperation, and have a new set of international relations, where people relate to the best tradition of the other one, the best culture, that we have a dialogue of the most beautiful periods in the history of each nation and make it known universally. This is what I call for the human species to become adult. that we should stop treating other nations like 4-year-old boys kicking each other against the knee, which is what the war, resolving conflict by war is really all about. And that we can have a completely different world where people relate to each other like Einstein and Planck, or like Wilhelm von Humboldt and Schiller, or other such great thinkers who treated each other because of the creative potential of the other genius. And I think that that will be the future of civilization if we overcome this present outdated thinking of just making money for money's sake, accumulating riches to have a fancy life for a few and misery for the many. And I think that we really should use the potential which is in the fact that Trump is trying to get a better relationship with Russia, and that he should go back to his initial positive relationship with China, his friendship with Xi Jinping, and that all the people who were involved in the Russia Gate, Mueller Gate, that they should basically face their appropriate punishment, because they committed the collusion with foreign governments and not Trump. So I think we are in a very, very interesting moment in history, and it's one of these periods where individual activity and engagement makes a huge difference. So join the Schiller Institute, work with us. We have everything to gain.
Having a membership drive right now to give people the opportunity to participate in that. And Helga, you talk about the role of the individual. It's clear you've played a role as an initiator and as providing ideas that are being gobbled up all over the world. And that's what we see now in Africa. Again, I'd encourage people to go to the Schiller Institute website. We have the sign up on the screen now of how to do this. Get the new report and study it. Read it, think through what it means.